Suresh ran a small hardware shop in Nagpur. In 2011, his neighbor built a wall that crossed 3 feet onto his property. Suresh filed a case. His daughter was 8 years old back then, barely old enough to understand what a court even was. She is 23 now. She got married this year. The case is still going. This isn't an unusual story, it's an ordinary one, and that's exactly what makes it worth understanding. India has more practicing lawyers than almost any country on earth. It has thousands of courts spread across every district, and yet an ordinary civil dispute like a boundary wall can take over a decade to resolve. So here's the real question. Is Indian law actually broken, or is something else going on that nobody bothers to explain? This isn't a small problem hiding in a few unlucky cases. India's court system is carrying one of the largest case backlogs of any judiciary in the world. Tens of millions of pending cases stacked across every level, from small local courts up to the Supreme Court. Picture a city of 1 million people with only a handful of doctors. It's not that medicine has failed. It's not that the doctors don't know what they're doing. There simply aren't enough hands for the number of people who need care. Keep that image in mind because Indian courts run into almost exactly the same problem, except instead of doctors and patients, it's judges and cases. And that one shortage explains more of the story than any single law ever could. India's court system is largely built on a structure designed during British rule, created for a much smaller population with a much smaller number of disputes and a legal culture built around formal, methodical, multi-stage procedure. That structure was never redesigned at the scale India actually grew today. Today, India has one of the lowest numbers of judges per capita compared to countries like the US or the UK, meaning each judge is often responsible for a caseload that would be considered unmanageable almost anywhere else. On top of that shortage, decades of added procedural layers, multiple stages of appeal, formal paperwork requirements, and a courtroom culture where postponing a hearing is often easier than actually hearing it, kept stacking on top of a system that already didn't have enough people to keep up. Here's what the actual journey looks like. A case usually starts at a trial court, the first stop where evidence is presented and witnesses are heard. If either side is unhappy with the result, it can move to a high court. If it goes further still, it can eventually reach the Supreme Court. At every single one of these stages, delays don't come from one dramatic failure, they come from dozens of small ones stacking on top of each other. A lawyer unavailable on a given date, a judge transferred mid-case, forcing a new judge to start over, a request for more time to gather documents, a backlog of hundreds of other cases ahead of yours on the same day's docket. None of these individually feels like a crisis. Multiply them across years and a boundary wall dispute quietly becomes a decade-long case. Let's walk through what actually happened to Suresh's case, because this pattern repeats across millions of similar disputes. The first hearing, instead of happening within weeks, gets scheduled 8 months out simply due to how full the court's calendar already is. Once it begins, one side requests an adjournment to gather additional documents, pushing the next hearing months further. A judge handling the case gets transferred to a different district, and the new judge needs time to review the entire case filed from scratch. Eventually, a ruling comes from a losing side appeal, sending the entire case to a higher court, essentially restarting larger parts of the process. None of this required anyone to act in bad faith. Every step on its own looks like ordinary procedure. It's the accumulation that turns years into over a decade. It's tempting to call this corruption or incompetence or a broken system. The more honest picture is less dramatic and in some ways more frustrating. An overwhelmed, understaffed judiciary built for a much smaller country, trying to deliver carefully methodical justice to 1.4 billion people without the number of judges ever scaling up to match. It's not that the system doesn't work. It's that it's trying to do far too much with far too few people, using rules that were never built for this scale. There are efforts underway to change this. E-courts initiatives, digitizing case filings and hearing fast-track courts created specifically for certain categories of cases like those involving women and children, and ongoing pushes to increase the number of judicial appointments across the country. But change at this scale moves slowly. The same way the cases themselves do. So somewhere in Nagpur, a case about 3 feet of land outlived the childhood. Suresh's daughter grew up, studied, fell in love, and got married. And the paperwork about a wall is still sitting in a queue, waiting its turn behind millions of others just like it.